A very good evening, team. It's Rob Stewart with you. I've got some funky graphics. Oh, we've got a double funky graphic. I'll have to change that. It's amazing how these things happen. Right. Halifax has put out their HPI today, and they have confirmed the same trend that Nationwide talked about, which is a bump up in the October figures compared to September. So if you remember, Nationwide showed us a 0.9% bump up. Halifax have shown even higher at a 1.1%. So the question is, have we hit the bottom, and is the property market reversing, or is there more to it? Is there actually something going on with the HPIs? Are they showing us a really accurate reflection of what's going on in the UK property market? Today, in today's session, we are going to look into this. And I'm going to run a little experiment. So as well as looking at the data from the HPIs, this evening, what I want to do is I want to go onto the front line, and I want to see what's happening in terms of price reductions and what's happening in terms of the market movements for actual property listings, which are open source property listings. So we're going to be doing a bit of research, and we're going to be doing it live, and hopefully it works. So first of all, as I always say, we are live. So I can see lots of thumbs up. Good evening, everybody. I believe we probably are live, and you can hear me and see me, which is absolutely fantastic. Please ask the questions as we go through. As always, if you're watching on the replay, please put your questions or your thoughts and comments in. I'll always come back to you. Welcome to my new subscribers. For those of you who have not been on one of the live streams before, what I do on these sessions is look at objective data so we can cut through the headlines and the BS and try and understand what's actually going on with the market so we can make more informed decisions. So let's dive straight into it. Let's have a look at the actual Halifax numbers. So you can see we have a monthly change of 1.1%, quarterly change of minus 1.9%, which still gives us an annual change year on year of minus 3.2%. So the big thing that I want to draw out of this is that the narrative is still extremely, I would say, bearish. Okay, so when you look at the little blurb underneath, and this is very similar to what happened with the Nationwide, you can see that they're saying, effectively, I just want to try and find the right thing. This is likely to have strengthened. Okay, so prospective sellers appear to be taking a cautious attitude, leading to a low supply of homes for sale, which is likely to have strengthened prices in the short term, rather than prices being driven by buyer demand, which remains weak overall. So effectively, this is exactly what Nationwide said, that even though there is this little tick up, it's all being driven by the complete constrained supply of properties on the market. If you remember last week, when we looked at the Nationwide, we looked at some of the Zoopla HPI sort of figures, which showed the supply of new properties being listed was actually reducing on a month-by-month basis. So less stock coming onto the market, more sticking, but we're still in a narrative of, basically super tight market with not a lot on, and that is this uptake. So I'll go into how the HPIs are actually calculated in a bit in terms of the hedonic regression model. But before we do that, let's just have zoom in on the actual graph itself. Okay, so if we look at this, I've just noticed actually, team, that I'm just going to try and fix this. This is what happens when you play around with things beforehand. I just need to make that a little bit bigger so you can't see the other video feed behind it. So when we look at the actual house prices, the actual house price growth, we have seen this uptick. But if you look at it, I'm not going to chart it. We're kind of in a channel, and the channel is still downtrend channel. So as I always say, everything goes up and goes down, but not in a straight line. So we are still in a downtrend. And if you were to plot a line down the bottom and a line on the top, we're actually in quite a nice channel, which is trending down. The actual Halifax report itself said they're expecting prices to continue down through 23, all the way through 24, and probably not see a recovery until 25. So that's what's actually coming now out of the mouths of the indexes themselves. So Halifax have come out and they put a bold claim and said they don't see us troughing until end of 24, beginning of 25 at the earliest. So I think that's fairly interesting. There's not a huge amount else to say. It's a very short report. They're talking about first-time buyer market again, shows relative resilience. Note the word relative. And again, this just carries on with the, I'm sorry, guys, we've got to get these off. Give me a sec. This is what happens when you play around with various tech things. There we go. We don't want to see those again. the first-time buyer market is going to have some more resilience because the rents have gone up. I know there's some now people talking about, have we topped out in terms of rent growth? Rents are still extremely high, and we've seen huge rent inflation over the last 18 months to 2 years. So if you kind of draw a line halfway through the country and go above it, it's actually still cheaper, even with higher interest rates, for people to be buying than renting. So even though people can afford less, people are still trying to buy, especially first-time buyers are probably the most buoyant part of the market, but it is all relative. It's hardly like everybody's flooding in and there's loads of buyer demand. They're kind of clutching at straws a little bit there. So I think that's worth noting. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the different HPIs in case anybody is not fully up to speed on how these house price indices work. We do have multiple house price indices. We've got the UK house price index, which is kind of the ONS data. And then we've got the two main lenders, which are the Nationwide and the Halifax. And then we've got the Rightmove. So if we look at this graph, okay, down the bottom here, we've got the blue line is the UK HPI, the green is the Halifax, and this burgundy line is the Nationwide. And then the Rightmove index is this dotted black one at the top. So you can see there's a big difference between the Rightmove and the other three. And that's because the three that we generally look at, and I don't talk too much about the Rightmove, the three that we look at is called a hedonic regression model. Now, I don't want to go too much about the hedonic regression model if I show you how they do it. Okay, so this is the sort of maths, right, that goes into calculating hedonic regression models. Basically, I want you to think about it that there's multiple elements to a property. It could be number of rooms, could be square footage, could be gardens, could be en suites, could be location. And all of these kind of have an individual weighting within the property. And then on a month by month basis, they combine all of these elements and come up with effectively this average, index. So it's not a perfect model, and it doesn't mean that it's just a mathematical mean as we would think about it, which is take all the actual sale prices, add them up, divide them by the amount, and that's the average. That's not how it works. Okay, it's much more complex than that, which means that the data maybe does not reflect what's actually going on the front line. Now, as I was researching this, by the way, sorry, this is different to Rightmove, which is why the Rightmove is so much higher in terms of its actual values when you look at it compared to the other three. Interestingly, when you look at the other three, as I've always said, the UK HPI and the Halifax have been pretty much in lockstep. They obviously use a very similar model with the same inputs. The Nationwide, you can see, has been diverging probably since about 2015. And actually, the Nationwide has been averaging quite a lot less than the Halifax and the ONS. However, I want to highlight something that I picked up that I've not actually picked up on before. So this is, if I can find it, right. I want to talk about, this is from the government website, and you can have a look at this. I'll post a link if you want to. This talks about the data that is excluded from properties that go into the UK HPI. Now, whether or not these same sort of things are excluded from the Nationwide and the Halifax, I don't know. This is the UK ONS, so this is the government, ONS, government, two different things. Data, you can see here, well, it's obvious that commercial transactions, it's residential only. But this one caught my attention. So sales that were not full market value. Now, I do not know, and I'd love it if somebody can, sort of help me. Sorry, I would get rid of that. I've obviously got multiple of these on. It's all good fun, this, isn't it? It's all good fun. We just might have to see my name every time that I go onto this screen. So if anybody else can shed any light of this and how they actually work this, I'm not quite sure how they work out what's market value that goes into the data. But for me, that's quite a massive exclusion to put into the to the UK ONS HPI. Basically, what they're saying is we're going to chart the average house price, but we're going to take anything out that we consider is below the actual value in itself, which is kind of bonkers when you think of it, because at certain distress times like we are in a down, properties are selling probably faster than they have been. And when you have buyers, when you have distressed sellers, you have sales. By definition, the sales are going to be coming down, and therefore you could class that they're below their market value. If somebody needs to sell their house quickly to facilitate a sale, stop a repossession, something like that, they're probably going to sell it quickly but below market value. So if all this data is being excluded from the UK ONS HPI, is this then skewing the data and giving us a really accurate figure? That's sort of an interesting thing that I want to talk about. So that was the big thing that struck me. We've got some other things here, which is sort of less important. But there is also, we have repos. So where was this? By way of compulsory purchase order, court order. So effectively court order and things that are more than one property. So people are buying portfolios, for example, that's going to be excluded from the data. So we've got quite a few exclusions in that. So therefore, when I look at this data, I kind of go, what's actually happening here? What is the reality of what's happening on the shop floor? And how can we be sure that these graphs we're looking at are actually giving us the correct data? So what I want to do is, first of all, work out how to take that off. Oh, no. Oh, I see what it is. It's a different thing. Right. Ignore. Before we look at this exercise about we're going to crunch what's going on the front line, I want to ask you a favor. This is the time where I ask my one and only favor of the session, which is to help me grow this channel. As you know, I spend lots of time researching these presentations, these lives, and the pre-recorded videos to get this data to you so you can make more informed choices. I want to be able to do that more and have more resources that I can put into this. And the only way I can do it is if the channel is growing, because that's what YouTube likes. And the bigger the channel is, the more reach it gives, the more people we can reach, the more I can help you. So the only thing that I'd ever ask is for you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So I've got my second overlay of the day. So please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I know it's really easy to come and watch videos and say that's awesome content and then don't subscribe so you don't get to see the notifications in the future. And only 0.01% of views turn into a subscription. So it's the only favor I'll ask. And in return, I'll cut you a deal that I'll continue to work tirelessly to find out what's actually going on and talk about the actual figures behind the headlines so we can make big decisions. That's all I'll ever ask of you. Okay, please do that now if you haven't. So back to this, and I'll probably leave it on this for a while so we don't have the other one going on. I'm going to do two things, right? I'm going to look at Rightmove, and then I'm going to look at two pieces of prop tech that I use in my business. By the way, give me a thumbs up. If anybody is using either property data or property filter, can you put it in the comments? Give me a thumbs up. I'm interested to know if anybody else are using these pieces of software, but they are great tools for analytics to actually see what's going on in the market and actually to accelerate the process to find property deals. If you're sourcing property at the moment, what I've done is I put links to both of these pieces of software in the description. And after we come off the live, what I'll do is I'll put it in a pinned comment as well, because both pieces of software, you can get a 2-week subscription, free trial to give them a go, give them a whirlwind if you want to do that. So I'll put a link up for that in a bit. So what I'm going to start with is I'm on Rightmove right now, and I'm just going to draw an area around the whole of the UK. Okay, so I'm going to do this really crudely so we don't take up too much time. It's not a perfect system, and I'm not perfect at scrolling when I'm doing lives as well. So the data on Rightmove, I want to look at England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland markets. And this does go, let's just go up here. I don't know how much stuff is being sold further north than that, which gives me basically the search area of the UK. And I'm going to search on this area and see how many properties we have for sale that are listed on Rightmove. Now, it's obviously not going to show them all on the map, but if we look at the bottom, right, you can see at the bottom there, it says too many properties here, 437,459 are hidden. Now, let's assume it's got, a few hundred on there at the moment. So let's just go round and say it's 438,000 properties listed on Rightmove right now, okay? So rather than trawl through the Rightmove data and look at how many of these are potentially distressed or below market value or have price reductions, I'm going to have a look at a couple of pieces of software that can tell us what's actually going on. So if I go on to property data, property data has got several sections to it. We can research and do analytics. We can actually source property, and we can actually stack up the deals that we're looking at. So I'm in this source element here, and there's various strategies we can source by on property data. What I want to do is source or have a look at properties that have their price reduced. Now, again, property data is searching the full UK market. It's got an algorithm that picks everything up. And what this is showing me, I don't know if you can see this, is that we have 34,716 properties that are reduced by 15% or more since the first listing. So again, let's just go rounded. Let's say it's 35,000. Now, if we go back to where we had here, we had 400, let's call it 440,000 for ease. And we've got 35,000 for ease. It's not far off 10% of the properties that are currently listed on Rightmove that have now had reductions of 15% or more. And for me, 15% is significant, which is interesting because last week to Zoopla data, Zoop had 4 out of regions are now showing price falls year on year. Price, but this, this is listings. Is it listings or sales? The Zoopla, I think it's sales actually. But we're not seeing those of more than 5%. But these are going to filter in. So if we've got almost 10% of the market now has prices reduced by 15%, for me that is fairly considerable because 15% is a large chunk of properties that has been reduced by that amount. If you actually look at the data, and this isn't showing it, if you look at the data of properties that have probably been reduced by 5 to 15%, I would imagine it's going to be at least that much again, if not sort of double that amount. So when you start to add that up, right, we are seeing huge amounts of property reductions across the board. So for me, that is showing a distressed environment that we're working in. Okay. By the way, there's lots of things you can see on this. Have a give it a test drive. If you want to give it a test drive, go and head over to this link. I said I'll pin it afterwards. It's propertydata.co.uk/a/RS. You get a 2-week trial on property data. Give that a little whirl. The second thing I want to do, okay, is I want to go back to Rightmove. This time, rather than going on the whole thing, I'm going to want to have a look at Chester because I'm going to now compare it with some other stats. And if we zoom out of Chester, and what I'd like to do is put a circle around Chester. Let's just go 10 miles around Chester. That's probably a good amount. So you can see again down here is giving us, by the way, I put Chester in because that's my investment area. So if I invest kind of around here into Ellesmere Port, nothing to see. No, it's not a good investment area. Everybody stay well clear of Chester. But I'm now going to go over to this tool called Property Filter. Now, property data, for me, I use for my analytics. So we get lots of data about sort of average prices by room, by price per square foot. You can see spreads, distribution curves, all of that sort of stuff. Property Filter is then what I use to effectively source and pipeline my properties. So within this, I'm going to go in here and do something called add a new leads generator. And I've already got it sort of zoomed in on Chester because, again, that's my area. So it's kind of defaulting there. And what I can do is just select these postcode areas, all right? And let's just go, that's probably a bit too far out, actually. If I compare the two, I'm roughly, we want to go halfway onto the Wirral, just into Liverpool. I'm trying to do roughly the same geographical areas to do a good comparison. That's probably fine. Now we can filter this by lots of different methods, depending on what we're looking for. Let's say I just want to find things. Doesn't really matter, to be honest. Let's just find no template at all. Let's just look at everything, and let's just look at this as test, right? So I want to save this leads generator. Oh, please! Oh, I've got to say it's going to make me select a strategy. So what I'm going to do is look for, let's just say things to flip. All right, I'm going to look at things to flip. So if we look at the test and I come in on this and check the leads, what this is going to do is it's going to show me what we got on the market that makes or meets this criteria. Now, what I actually want to do is I want to expand this out. Sorry, I'm just trying to find out how I edit this. Should be fairly easy, but there we go. There's the filter. And I want to see a lot more sort of properties here. So I'm just going to what I'm going to do actually, team, is I'm going to go back to this. I'm just going to create a new one, do the same areas. And I do want to put my own filters in and just put everything, because I want to see all of the market on this. There you go. Should have done this. Should have done this. should have definitely done this more. Do you know what? I actually have got one with price reduction. So let's just go back to this one. So I made one earlier. We'll just go with this one. There you go. Never do live software when you're doing a YouTube live. So what this is the same geographical areas. Okay, and I've actually got it filtered at the top for leads with price reduction. So if you remember, if we come over here to Chester, we've got about 4,000 in the area. Okay, and if I look at this, we've got properties that are back on the market and reduced. So this is going to give us basically a star rating for how hot this particular property might be if we're looking for deals. So we go from 5 stars down to 1 star. Now, properties that are back and reduced means properties that have been sold or been withdrawn from the market, but are now back on market. So generally something that has a sale going through, for whatever reason that's fallen through and it's back on the market, it's reduced. So you can see in that geographic, we have 475 properties, okay, that are back on the market after having had a sale agreed on and reduced. So again, compare that to Rightmove, that's over 10%. So over 10% of those properties have had a significant price reduction. Now, properties that are just back, so these are properties that have had a sale on. It doesn't have to have a sale on. It could have just been removed for whatever reason and back on the market, but that's unlikely. Had a sale on, but back on the market, 887. So that is over 20%, in fact, well over 20%. Actually, I think this area is probably slightly smaller than the Rightmove area. And reduced, right, these are all reduced properties in that geographical area, 1,610. Almost 50% of the properties in that geographical area have had a price reduction on them. Now, these are properties that have been on the market for greater than 90 days, so greater than 3 months, 2,198. Don't worry too much about the new on the market, less than 5 days, but sold subject to contract that haven't sold, so had an offer on within 70 days, but haven't sold, or already after 70 days haven't sold, are 1,000. So you can see, number one, how many properties are sort of dragging their heels to go through the conveyancing process. But this, for me, these stats are very telling. To have almost 50% of that stock having price reductions shows that seller motivation is absolutely ramping up. And, properties falling through, 887, just in that area is a significant amount of properties. So when we look at this, I'm just going to come off here for a moment. Oh, I love it. Live TV, right? When you look at that does not correlate with a little blip in the 2 HPIs, with the Nationwide and the Halifax HPI. That to me is quite a significant disconnect between what is going on the shop floor and what is going on with the HPIs. So for those people who are in property and are looking for property and are actively sourcing at the moment, opportunity out there. There's a lot of people now, whether, of course, a price reduction does not necessarily mean that it's now kind of come down to below where it should be. It could have started at an unreasonably high price to start with. And that's probably quite likely. There's probably a lot of sellers originally pricing their properties too high for the market. They've been caught out and they're now having to start dropping it. But we are seeing that increased shift to the sellers waking up, reducing. We're seeing a lot more properties falling through, and that's what's happening on the shop floor. And certainly that is without a doubt what I'm seeing when I'm on the shop floor, because we're sourcing, we're buying. We recently had a deal agreed at a property that was listed at offers over $1 million, and the vendor wanted 1.1 mil, and we recently agreed it, and it's going through conveyancing right now at 908,000. So that's a significant discount from where the listing was and where the original, the original vendor expectation was. So that's when you look at things as a price per square foot, that's a significantly depressed price per square foot on the properties we are looking at. So that's what I wanted to cover today. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. By the way, if you wanted to, I'm not going to go, so I don't want to have those things come up again. I've got to work out how to use this software. I'm going to start using lower thirds and all that sort of stuff. What's your thoughts? What are you seeing on the shop floor? I'm going to go through some comments. We've got M. Duffy, more than 75% of listings in Bournemouth are price reduction. So many flats been on for 12 months or more. Some people saying audio has static on it. Is that still there? Is the audio static still there? Apologies if the audio is not good. Let me reduce it. Sorry, I didn't see that. Richard, late on parade, no worries. So everybody's saying they're seeing huge amounts of price reductions. Nick, are you trying to say they're fudging the numbers to keep house prices up? I'm not saying they're fudging the numbers to try and keep house prices up. I think when we look at the HPIs, Nick, people who put out HPIs have an agenda. The banks have an agenda. So Nationwide and Halifax are lenders. Lenders have to lend money to make money, right? If we see, and it's not a credit crunch, it's almost a market crunch, right? If we see this market crunch happening, nobody's buying, nobody's taking mortgages. I say nobody, of course there are some, but when you look at the mortgage approvals, they have dropped dramatically. And the last month's data was 43,000. in terms of approvals, which is like only just above where we were in the credit crunch of 2008. Banks have to lend to make money. Yes, they've been making quite a lot of money by not putting interest rates on savings accounts, for example, probably arbitraging that. But they have a vested motivation to get people to be their customers. They're just private organizations. They've got costs to run. They've got a P&L to run, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying they're just directly making the numbers up. But, when you look at what's going on with the figures, you don't know exactly what's going into the figures. Don't know how exactly that hedonic regression model is spitting out things. And imagine they have a model that's going to be favorable for them because it's their agenda. It gets eyeballs on them. I do think what's quite is both the Nationwide and the Halifax. What's really interesting for me is the fact that both of them have come out and said categorically that this slip up in price is because of a constrained supply of new properties. So tiny supply, transactions smaller, which is going to skew the data anyway, and it's not because of buyer demand. So however their model works, they're looking at that data and going, right, it's not just because we've got loads of people coming and buying, it's because nobody's selling, and that's having an impact onto the model. And they've both come out and said that they expect property prices to continue to fall through 2024 now. So I think that's the biggest takeaway that I want to take away from that. Good evening, 555. 555 says, we need forced selling for prices to crash. Yeah, that's absolutely right. 555, totally agree with you. For those of you who are new or watching this new, probably most people on the live are probably regulars, but if you're watching on the replay, remember there's three things we need for that property crash. We need affordability issues, which we have. We need unemployment. Sorry, well, let's go to that last. We need negative equity because that accelerates the whole process, because if people are forced into negative equity, it makes it a really nasty spiral for people. But the big trigger that we're not seeing now is the unemployment figure. Regardless of how fudged we think unemployment is, the labour market is still tight enough to mean that people have liquidity to be able to pay these higher mortgage interest rates. We are not in a position where we're having forced sellers, and that is being compounded by the fact the banks are holding off on their repossessions with the charter with the government. Richard, I think it's listings for zooplankton, as they wouldn't have access to price sold data. Was that a typo, Richard? Zooplankton? I do like it. The trouble is the HPI data continues to fuel unrealistic sellers and their expectations. Yeah, this is true. And look, this is why we do these, and this is why I want to come and look at actually the reality of what's going on. Because a lot of people could pick up the paper and go, Nationwide showing house prices up, Halifax showing house prices up. We've hit the bottom. We're bouncing up, right? We're on recovery. There's plenty of commentators out there who do not believe that we'll ever see a crash. Let's just forget for the moment that when we look at inflation adjusted figures, right, we are in 15, 16% negative territory year on year, from peak, not year on year, peak to where we are now. We're coming up to the 20% mark in terms of real inflation adjusted price reductions. That means we are in a crash. It's just a real value crash. And actually, interestingly, that means property is pretty affordable right now from an inherent value point of view when you compare it with people's nominal wages, right? So as the investment community, I've been saying it for a few months now, we are in or getting into the phase of accumulation. Some people will be sitting on the sidelines and not touching it. I know that. Some people are going, look, I think it's going to go down 20, 30% from here. They don't want to touch it. Fine. If you're not particularly fussed about house prices, like overall house prices, and you're more worried about individual property prices that you're buying, i.e. getting a below market value, getting a price reduction, but more importantly, getting a return on capital, which means we can add value, recycle capital out. Let's just temper that with the interest rates and then generate cash flow from it. If you're looking at return on capital, the actual headline property price is not relevant in the slightest. So, for me, accumulation phase right now, because historically, and I'll do another video on this, not today, probably next week, when we look at the real inflation, also the inflation adjusted house price graph, when we've seen a prolonged period. In fact, what I'll do, just give me a sec, because I think it would probably be worthwhile getting that out, just so you see what I'm talking about. Give me a sec. There you go, this one. Can we see that? Right, so this is the graph I'm talking about. This is the inflation adjusted house price, right? So we are all the way down here at the moment, significantly below the red line, which is the trend line. You can see that actually the last time we were this far below the trend line was down here, which was the crash from 89 that kind of took us to the mid 90s. And from the mid 90s, right, let's see what happened. What happened there? We do get that spring effect. It kind of compresses. At some point, the economic conditions will change, right? We are not going to stay in, I'm not going to say recession because it's not in recession. We're not going to stay in this challenging economic scenario forever. We're not going to stay in a high inflationary environment forever, right? It will come down. We know this. It's just not come down yet. It's still sticky, but it will come down. It might be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it will come down at some point, right? It's probably going to come down quite rapidly next year in 2024. We're not going to stay in this environment forever. Even though interest rates are high at the moment, which they are compared to the last 15 years, they're going to come down. They're not going to come down to where they were, but they are going to come down. Even if they settle from where they are now, 5.25, even if we see another couple of ticks up, 5.5, 5.75, and then we tick down back to 4, 3.5, it's a long way. That's a long way down from where we are now. When that happens, which again could be 2-3 years time, excuse me, we're going to see that spring go like that again. Okay, so there to there, big rise. Now, the other one we're looking at, by the way, this is interesting because really that sort of period from the 90s correction up until the 2008 was the real big trough to peak, if you like. When we look at it here, and again, this is inflation adjusted. So I just want to get rid of that. When we look at the trough for inflation adjusted, these are real house prices, not nominal house prices. So the peak sort of following COVID, it's actually a lot less than the first one. So we can still see that it's springboarded up, but not nearly as much as we saw, from sort of end of the 80s to the trough of mid 90s up to sort of 2008. Will we see that sort of springboard again? I don't know. We may not. But I'm looking historically or pretty cheap here in terms of below the line. Yes, we are. So I feel that for the long term, we'll want to be in the accumulation phase as long as you properly add value to. So buying it at the right price that you can add value to with all the mechanisms we talk about. And as long as you can generate cash flow that gives you a significant return above interest rates at the current level. Those are the two things. Look, very quickly, if you want to know how to do all of this, please download the white paper I've got. It's a free PDF. It goes through the strategies that I talk about and teach right now of how to actually achieve this, what's working well in the current market, what I would not buy, what I'd be avoiding with the barge pole. It's robstewartglobal.com/white-paper. It'll take you about 20 minutes. If you haven't downloaded it already, give it a go and have a look at it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Sorry, got to go through those again. Let's see what other questions we've got. Sean, problem with these regression models is that they have been trained on historic data where house prices have largely been growing. Soon as we go into serious downturn, they fall apart. I think that's very true, Sean. And I think the narrative that we're seeing is because of that. So both HPIs are saying, yeah, look, we've seen a tick up, but actually all the data sets, the environment we're in, are not designed for these models. So let's just take it with a pinch of salt. I apologize about the audio, guys. I've got absolutely no idea what's going on with it. Everything here I've got is showing that it's working correct. So I'll have to have a look afterwards about what's causing the audio issues. I don't know if it's an internet connection. Is the video all right? I'll try and work that out. Apologies. Magic says they might just print money again. They might do. Not just at the moment. I think we're still in tightening for some time. It's interesting. So I was listening to podcast today on my way back from Chester, which I did this morning. There was talking about probably about once a decade, we have an event that nobody sees coming, which is sort of, a global catastrophe, if you like, that triggers these sort of things. So over the last sort of 20, 30 years, we've had COVID, we've had 9/11. We've got sort of Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, in the UK, we had Brexit. We've got these things that stimulate, 2008 financial crisis. So if you think about that, 9/11, 2008, COVID are probably once in a decade events, which nobody sees coming, nobody can mitigate for, other than sort of have a load of liquidity to be able to ride this sort of stuff out. But these events are what cause things like quantitative easing, right? Money printing to stimulate economies. Can we foresee them? No, we can't, because if anybody could, then we'd all be very successful. Can we structure our portfolios and our investments to ride them out? Yes, 100% we can. So if we make an assumption that these things will happen, if we mitigate that risk by having buffers, having liquidity, making sure that any property we have has got cash flow that is significantly above our, the current lending rate, stress test it all. I always used to have a big issue with people in the training industry, property training industry, who used to talk about refinance. Property goes up, refinance, pull it out. You got more debt. Always want to take on more debt, and then you just take it to your deathbed. That's fine, but what happens if you can't service that debt? I've always personally kept my leverage about 60-65% loan to value across my whole portfolio. Of course, sometimes it's fluctuated above that as I've bought new things, but then come down as I've sort of added value to the things I've bought. But that strategy has definitely been proven to be working in the current environment with interest rates going back up. Those people who are at super high leverage in their portfolios are really struggling right now. Doesn't matter what they say on social media, right? About, oh, look, we can still pay the mortgage. Doesn't mean they're actually still leading any sort of life. Trish says, greedy estate agents feeding delusional sellers. I think we surely are seeing a corner being turned with that. Look up Martin Armstrong, and his prediction is that until 2032, we'll be in the falling housing market cycle. Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, personally, I've said for a while now that I would see real house prices falling, I think, for 7 years from peaks. That takes us to 2029. If we go peak of 22, 29 for real house prices. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that nominal can't be going up if there's strong wage growth, nominal wage growth. So we could see nominal going up, real going down, depending on the factors, or we might just see it all go down. But it's certainly, last week I talked about, there was some prediction that's saying, by a macroeconomic think tank or research consultancy, saying they predict that we'll be back to 2022 peak by the end of 24. I can't see that happening. Anyway, Nick agreeing there'll be more QE money printing lending to businesses paying for public services. Be back up. I don't know if anybody's still on. Let me know if anybody's still on. Anybody's still on? Give me a thumbs up if you're still on. It says that people are still on. If there are, that's quite incredible. Let me know. Very bizarre. YouTube has done something very, very bizarre today. I've never seen this. Oh. Yeah, we're still on. Sorry about that, team. If anybody's still here, I'm still live. I'm going to end it. 30 watching. Well, that kind of ruined everything, didn't it? I've never seen that before. My internet stopped. Just had to reset the router. The whole thing's hung up. What I'll probably do, because I don't think this is even going to sort of play on the replay, I'm going to probably hit stop. And what we might do is reconvene tomorrow, which is Wednesday, tomorrow evening. Go again, look at it all without all of those issues, maybe be a bit more streamlined, and we can get into a better conversation. Unless anybody else has got any questions now, we want to go through any of the stuff we just spoke about. By the way, absolute credit and kudos to everybody for sitting there for 5 minutes with no internet connection, waiting for this to come back on. I do appreciate that. Let me know if you've got any cues, because otherwise we'll go for the summary. So, I just like playing around with this now. The summary, which is UK HPI, Nationwide HPI, Halifax HPI are showing funny things at the moment. As we had with some excellent comments today on the live stream, these indices are designed very much for upwards market and higher transaction volume. With the lower transaction volumes, this instability, uncertainty in the market, they're throwing out some fairly spurious figures. When we look at the figures, okay, we're still actually in a down channel, quite a defined down channel. So we're going to see what's going to happen, because both indices are still saying we're going to see drops for the next year. We then looked at all of the property price reductions, properties that have fallen through on a couple of bits of software. And it's showing that what we're seeing on the shop floor is very different to the reality that the indices are showing. Okay, that's it. That's what we got. Super, you stuck with it. Awesome. Live TV. It's like, don't work with animals and children. Live's always fun. That's why a lot of YouTubers don't go live, by the way. It's all fun. Love it. All right, team. I might do this again tomorrow. We'll see if it records or not and puts itself out on YouTube. If it doesn't, we're going to do it again tomorrow. So in the meantime, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Or maybe I'll just pre-record going through that tomorrow if I've got time. But I won't. I'll go live. Have a good one, team. It's always been a pleasure. Oh, sorry. Change is coming. Let's begin. Know what your outlook is for 2024 house prices and where the bottom might be. As a 32 million question session. So what I was saying earlier with my prediction house prices is I can see if you look back in history, right? I'm going to go back through this, which we were talking about. When we look at real, so inflation adjusted house prices, let me just get some of this scribbling off here so we can see it a little bit better. The peak to trough. So when we look at 89 to that trough, okay, when we look at 2008 to that trough, 2008 or 2007 to that trough was 6 years. So we had a 7-year and a 6-year. I could see something similar happening in terms of real house prices. So if we peaked in 22, I think it's not unreasonable to see real house prices trough out in 28, 29, which seems an awfully long way away. But when you look at that, it is still possible that we could see nominal house prices rising way before we see those real house prices start to rise again. So I always said that the max pain for the housing market is going to be the second winter after the peak. So the second winter of cost of living crisis. Now we're going into that now. Interestingly, right now we're having a very mild start. Well, we're at the end of the autumn, starts the winter, very mild. So I think we've got the utilities covered unless something happens, right? We still could see supply side shocks through Russia and Ukraine, through what's happening in the Middle East, if that starts spilling out. But I don't think there's any immediate threat for us to see spikes up in utility prices. And that's probably one of the main things, along with petrol or oil, that's going to feed back into the sort of inflationary data. And so therefore, I think we are on the downward curve here. However, we've still got lots of people coming off their fixed rate debt, cheap fixed rate debt, and we'll have another about 1.6 mil come off cheap fixed rate debt between now and the end of 2024. So people are having that pain sort of increase when you look at numbers, I would say for the next 6 to 12 months, okay? And then everything's going to start to normalize a bit. So I've always said in nominal house price terms, I would not be surprised if we see a start to trough mid to end of 24. I take that with a pinch of salt. So many things could happen between now and then, if I'm totally honest. But what I was saying earlier is I'm going to come off this. I'm not particularly fussed, for me, as a property investor, which is different, I understand, to people buying for a home, a primary home, where you're going to have different motivations to buy. As an investor, it's not like stocks and shares. It's not like you're trying to time the market. You're trying to, obviously, you don't want to buy high, sell cheap. But when you're doing this professionally, especially if you're sort of cash flow style investor, the actual headline price is less relevant compared to the amount of value you can add, what you can recycle, so how much cash you leave in a deal, and then the return you get on that cash. And of course, if there are various strategies we use to add value, that we don't even need to do physical works to a property. If we're doing things like sort of lease re-engineering, balance sheet hacking, shuffling paper around are my favorites, or adding units, carving things up is a good way of adding value, all of those things. Then we increase cash flow with models like house multiple occupation, higher density units, going sort of, I call it wholesale to retail as a strategy, short-term lets. We can get much higher cash flow. So as an investor, I'm always looking to maximize return on capital left in a deal. And actually, the headline property price is pretty irrelevant in that. Yes, of course, it helps if you buy something at a low value and then the market takes it up even further. That's not a bad thing, right? We're not going to say, we're not happy about that, but it's not the prime consideration. When I'm analyzing deals, I never, ever, ever consider any capital increase in that property. So, which is why I'm personally in the accumulation phase right now. We're out there, we're buying things. Went into cash on a few investments last year. Kind of ready for this, and I feel it's time to be deploying that right now. So yeah, I don't like to predict, because I think people who predict and go, property prices will trough 3rd of August 2024, I think they're just guessing. I don't like to guess. I think the trend is probably going to be going most of 2024, maybe even because everything's happening shallower and longer than maybe originally expected because of the high inflationary environment, which is masking a lot of it in nominal terms. We could be into 2025, beginning of 2025, which seems to be the same narrative that some of the analysts are coming up with as well. So that's my thoughts on that. No worries at all. Change is coming. Good. We've still got 40 people on. I am gonna call it a day. I'm gonna knock it off. If I've got a feeling the only thing that's going to go to YouTube is this last 5-10 minutes or so. So if that is the case, I'm just going to rerun this tomorrow and we'll go through it again. All right. So have a great evening. Apologies for the technical issues. I don't know what happened there. I think the router needed a good kick up the backside. I saw some people saying kids playing Call of Duty probably isn't far from the truth. But there we go. What we can do? I need a booster down here in the office. So I'll probably see you tomorrow. Please tune in again. We'll go through it all over again. Say the same stuff. It's been up, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.